Today, we're going to talk about one of Australia's darkest and most terrifying criminal cases. It's a story about a series of killings that absolutely gripped a nation and the incredibly difficult hunt for the man behind it all. This is the story of the backpacker murders. So, where does a story like this even begin? Well, it doesn't start with someone going missing. It starts with a truly grim discovery deep in a remote forest. A discovery that would unravel a trail of terror that had gone unnoticed for years. Picture this. It's September 19th, 1992. A couple of runners are navigating through the dense Belanglo State Forest when they stumble across something horrible. A body, partially buried and hidden under some fallen branches. Police arrive, and the very next day they find another body just 100 feet away. The victims were quickly identified as two young British travelers, Joanne Walters and Caroline Clark. And the scene? It was just sickening. Joanne had been viciously stabbed 14 times. Caroline had been shot 10 times in the head, in a way that made police believe the killer had actually used her for target practice. You can imagine what investigators were thinking. Was this some terrible, one-off act of violence? Or were they just scratching the surface of something much, much worse? It really didn't take them long to figure out they were looking at just the tip of a horrifying iceberg. As the police started digging, they connected this discovery to a whole string of missing person reports, and a truly chilling pattern started to emerge. It turned out that young travelers, both Australian and international, had been disappearing for years while hitchhiking right near this same area. And just look at this timeline. It's awful. It goes all the way back to 1989. Two young Australians, then a German woman, then two more Germans, and finally the two British women. All of them young, all of them out exploring the world, and they all just vanished. And the horror just kept coming. For the next year or so, as investigators combed through that forest, they found 5 more bodies. And these remains? They belonged to the other missing backpackers from that timeline. Now, there was absolutely no doubt a serial killer was at work, and Belanglo was his personal dumping ground. The ways these people were murdered were just unspeakably brutal and varied. Some were stabbed, some were shot. Anya Habshid was even decapitated. In another case, the victim's spinal cord was severed, which suggests they were paralyzed before they were killed. This wasn't just murder. It was torture. Okay, so at this point, something massive had to be done. A huge police operation, codenamed Task Force Air, was put together. Over 20 of the best detectives were brought in for one single purpose: find and stop the Belanglo killer. But think about the challenge they were facing. The crime spanned several years, there was very little physical evidence left at the scenes, and the killer was like a ghost. He left almost nothing behind. So how on earth do you catch someone like that? The big break in the case didn't come from a lab or some dusty old file. No, it came from a man all the way over in the United Kingdom who had survived a terrifying attack years earlier. And he was about to give police the one lead they desperately needed. This is the key: a British backpacker named Paul Onions. See, way back in 1990, he hitched a ride with a guy who called himself Bill. But during that ride, the driver pulled a gun on him and tried to tie him up. Miraculously, Paul Onions managed to escape and reported it, but the case went cold. Years later, he's watching the news about the bodies being found in Belanglo, and he thinks, that sounds like the guy who attacked me. He calls the Australian police. They show him a lineup of photos. And on May 5th, 1994, he points to one man and says, that's him. The man's name was Ivan Milat. And just like that, police had a name. They had a face. After years of searching in the dark, they finally had their man in their sights. The net was closing in fast. So just a couple of weeks later, it all comes to a head. Over 50 police officers descend on the suburban Sydney home of Ivan Milat, a 49-year-old road worker. And what they found inside his house was nothing short of a treasure trove of pure evil. This is just staggering. It wasn't just one piece of evidence. The house was full of it. They found parts of a rifle that ballistics matched to the crime scenes. But the most chilling discovery, they found the personal belongings of the victims. Their backpacks, their cameras, their sleeping bags, all kept like some kind of gruesome collection of souvenirs. So with all this overwhelming evidence, the jury, of course, found Ivan Milat guilty on all counts. He was sentenced to spend the absolute rest of his life in prison. But here's the thing about Milat. Even with this mountain of proof, he never, ever wavered. He even claimed years later, "It wasn't me." He stuck to that story of innocence right up until the day he died. You'd think a conviction like that would be the end of the story, right? But with Ivan Milat, his life in prison, and eventually his death, just left behind this haunting legacy of unanswered questions. Even behind bars, Milat was completely defiant. He tried to escape. He went on hunger strikes. At one point, he literally cut off his own pinky finger with a plastic knife and tried to mail it to the high court. And through all of that, right to the very end, when he died of cancer in 2019, he refused to give the victims' families the one thing they wanted: a confession. So officially, let's be clear. Ivan Milat was convicted of murdering 7 people, 7 young lives just brutally extinguished. But, and this is what's truly terrifying, the police believe that number isn't even close to the real total. Based on his travels and other unsolved cases, authorities think he could have been responsible for more than 30 deaths and disappearances all across Australia. And get this, while he never gave the public a confession, it's widely reported that he did admit his guilt to one person, his mother. He denied the world any answers, but it seems the real truth was known inside his own family. And that really leaves us with the final, haunting question that hangs over this whole case. We know about the 7 victims, but what about the dozens of other families whose loved ones disappeared without a trace? How many of them were also victims of Ivan Milat? And how many of their stories, how many secrets did he take to the grave with him? It's a chilling thought that we may never, ever know the true answer.